Hello everyone, Vulcan here, and as I said in my previous video, I'll be reviewing episode 72 and 73 of Dragon Ball Super. Now, I know I'm a bit late to the party, and that's a bit of an understatement, as episode 72 came out, I think it was on Christmas Day? I'm not sure anymore, but it was about 2 weeks ago. Now, I very strongly wanted to start off with Dragon Ball Super since my review of Ruby episode 7, which is when I announced that I was going to be diversifying and talking about other anime. Now, Dragon Ball has always been one of my favorite series to watch for the longest time. I certainly don't rate it as highly as other series like Fullmetal Alchemist, Shinsekai Yori, and Mushishi, but the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were absolutely fun shows to watch, and they also inspired me a lot during my childhood. Dragon Ball Super in itself started out rather weak for me, especially when the first two arcs were retellings of Battle of Gods and Revival of Frieza. Both were fun movies to watch and were leaps and bounds above other Dragon Ball movies. Yes, I'm referring especially to the Broly movies when I'm talking about how lacking the older films were. On top of that, the early episodes of Dragon Ball Super had such poor animation that I just don't. Ugh. But with the beginning of the Future Trunks arc and the way it progressed, I have to say that I've been extremely impressed with how Super has managed to rise up to meet the standards of the classics. I would even say that they exceeded the old series, if not for the way they ended the Trunks arc, which I may or may not get to at a later time. After all, the point of this video is to talk about episodes 72 and 73, so without further ado, let's get right to it. So starting off with episode 72, that was an extremely fun episode to watch and once more brings to light one of the elements of Super that I've thoroughly enjoyed ever since the Universe 6 tournament arc. That is the smart fighting that's been happening more often than not. In the old DBZ series, many of the fights were all about power levels, who had the greatest amount of brute force that would give either fighters the edge. What Super has managed to do, possibly even to a greater extent than the original Dragon Ball series, was to put more emphasis on strategy. The fight between Goku and Hit proved to be an excellent example of this, both the one in the U6 tournament arc and this one. Throughout the episode, Goku made multiple attempts at figuring out how Hit's new power functioned and how to counter it. It really went a long way to show just how much of a fighting genius Goku is, and I feel that it was something very lacking even in DBZ, as examples of Goku's talent were there but not as notable. The most prominent example I can think of is when Goku realized the Ascended Super Saiyan form was just too big and bulky to really be applicable in combat. The mechanics behind Hit's power and his time stop as a whole is something that I don't particularly agree with, but I'll get to that in a second. Goku discerning a way to fight Hit's power and giving Hit a run for his money was great to see and kept me on the edge of my seat throughout the entire episode. What was also really entertaining was the enjoyment Hit was deriving from this fight. In episode 71, we'd been shown how Hit performs his wet work. He was dispassionate, he was detached, he was emotionless. His behavior in this episode and his attitude toward the fight with Goku stood out in complete contrast to how he was previously, which is great to see and further reinforces my liking for Hit and makes me want to see more of him later in the series. This is a part where I say that I'm really stoked for the Multiverse tournament that's going to start in February. During the episode, we also got to see Champa and Vados. In the last episode, Whis gave Vegeta an indication that he knew what Goku was up to and what kind of training he was going through. I presumed that he was the one who hired Hit to kill Goku, and it would make sense that he did because Whis had pointed out Goku's weakness that outside of battle, he was always too relaxed and had a bad habit of letting his guard down. Hiring Hit, an assassin who could attack at any time, would force Goku to keep on guard at all times. On that note, it's worth pointing out how Goku has improved in that regard as well, considering that during the episode, Goku learned to dodge Hit's invisible ki blast, which seems to be impossible to detect even if you know how to sense ki. Vados later says she only hired Hit as a proxy, which further made me think that Whis was the one who hired Hit, but did so through his sister. However, at the end of the episode, it was revealed that it was actually Goku himself who hired Hit. In hindsight, I shouldn't even be surprised. Goku had always expressed the desire of wanting to fight Hit at his best, without any rules to hold him back from using his assassination techniques, which of course he did. Now, although the fight was just so much fun to watch, there are some things that didn't sit particularly well with me. To start off, I want to talk about this arc in general. At the start of episode 71, I was really excited at the thought that this arc would be focusing on Hit and was hoping, perhaps naively, that this would be a fairly long arc lasting at least until the Multiverse tournament would begin. I was a little disappointed that this arc lasted only 2 episodes. They were great episodes to watch, but I was thinking that with Goku dying in the last episode, he would go on to train in the afterlife, and we would perhaps follow the other characters on Earth who would train in order to avenge Goku. This would have been the perfect chance to see Gohan make his way back up. Of course, there's every indication that he will for the multiverse tournament, but this would have been the perfect opportunity to see it actually happen. Of course, we are getting such an opportunity with episode 73, but this would have been an equally good chance, I think. Now, there were some aspects of Hit's power which also didn't sit too well with me. Before I get to that, let's do a quick rundown of what Hit's power really is. Hit is able to apparently stop time for a fraction of a second. I think it was 0.1 seconds, but ever since the Universe 6 tournament arc, he's been able to extend that time, so who knows how long he can stop time now. In any case, that's typically enough for him to perform his assassination. In this episode, we've also seen him use a new ability, which is effectively Kagebunshi no Jutsu, or rather Shadow Clones. To explain how this works, Vados revealed that Hit's time stop is actually a time skip, wherein Hit skips over a period of time slightly into the future. To me, that poses a bit of a problem with the way it's been portrayed so far. If Hit's time stop is actually a time skip, I'd expect Hit not to be aware of what happens during the skip, seeing his opponents frozen in time, much like Dio's and Jotaro's The World, but simply find himself at a point in time slightly in the future. It wouldn't really give him the ability to change the future, but simply move forward. Then again, this is Dragon Ball, and the concept of time travel has always been a very convoluted one and rather nonsensical. However, looking back into that, I realized that was actually a misunderstanding on my part. The way Rhymestyle explained it made it more clear to me. Hit creates an alternate dimension of his own, or a pocket dimension where time moves forward within it, but not outside of it. I think this works by taking time away from the primary dimension where everyone exists within the same space-time continuum. By doing so, Hit is taking and storing time in his pocket dimension, which he can later use in order to create his shadow clones. These clones consume the amount of time that he stored in his dimension so that an image of himself can exist in the primary space-time continuum. Hit's ability to create shadow clones in the primary dimension I think also balances things out, because if Hit has been stealing time away from the primary dimension, I doubt that it would have gone unnoticed by Zeno or even just Champa. As we know, manipulating time in any way is illegal by universal law, but I believe Hit is able to restore the time he's taken from the primary dimension with his shadow clones because he's kind of reinserting himself into the main dimension. Kind of like how when you drink water and then expel it, by which I mean when you take a wee. What is taken eventually returns to the natural way of things. It's different from how Trunks manipulated time because he actually created multiple timelines, which has had adverse effects on the universe. That was the entire point of the previous arc after all. The reason I believe Rhymestyle is right is mainly because of how Hit's time stop was broken, so to speak, at the end of the episode as Goku powered through it. You can clearly see the dimension that Hit created to protect himself from the blast was being cracked from the outside. One thing I want to point out about Hit's clones is that I don't think those are skills he's had all along. Considering the clones aren't a lethal ability which allows him to kill his enemies, I'd have thought Hit would be allowed to use them during the Universe 6 tournament. Secondly, Goku commented how Hit had become much stronger since the tournament. These things both suggest that Hit learned these techniques after the tournament, and considering how they're specifically geared to misdirect an opponent's ability to sense him, I feel this is something Hit devised specifically to fight Goku. A counter-argument to that though would be that considering they were in a closed arena, one can doubt that trying to misdirect Goku with Shadow Clones would be much help if Goku could follow him with his eyes. However, Hit was still able to use his Shadow Clones in an open space during this episode, so that argument would be kinda moot. Throughout the series, we've often been shown how only Earthlings, as well as others who trained in martial arts on Earth, could sense the ki of others. Even Zamasu previously couldn't sense ki and had to learn it presumably long after obtaining Goku's body. In 1,000 years, it's certainly possible Hit encountered other beings who could sense energy, but since he hadn't used it before in the tournament, I'm inclined to think that this is a totally new skill. After all, even if Hit encountered other beings capable of sensing ki, I doubt any of them were able to counter his time skip and live to tell about it. However, Hit's invisible ki blast is most certainly an assassination skill considering how he one-shot Goku with it. I would say that a certain level of hacks is involved in this ki blast, as any other energy attack wouldn't kill Goku in one hit, pun intended. This is definitely something Hit has had for a very, very long time. Another thing that somewhat bothered me was Vegeta's characterization in this episode. Vegeta's always had a hard-on for training and exceeding his limits, so him wanting to cop out of training even if Whis was making him repeat his sets by miscounting isn't something I'd have expected from Vegeta. The way he copped out also didn't seem in character of him, considering he knows really well what being caught in a lie by Beerus would mean. Also, Granny's secret sauce? Who's gonna play the part of Granny? But that said, I'm not gonna lie, I did find it kind of funny, especially Whis' reaction on hearing about this secret and almighty recipe. But my biggest gripe with this episode by far was the way Goku came back to life. For him to be able to do that would have taken an incredible amount of foresight. For starters, how did Goku so accurately predict the very spot in which he'd be lying dead? You could say that Goku placed himself specifically on that spot in anticipation of what would happen, but this brings me to my next point. How did Goku manage to time the moment at which he would need to be revived, and more importantly, how quickly he'd be killed? There was no telling just how long a conversation between himself and Hit would take, or more pertinently, whether or not Hit would have an assassination skill that would in fact kill him in one blow. If Hit did not in fact have a one-shot skill and the initial fight would end up being drawn out, Goku's plan would fail and the blast would hit nothing, potentially ending with Goku dying without any way of being revived. Or, more seriously, with the Earth being destroyed because Goku can effectively vaporize the Earth in one shot. Last but not least, how did Goku know that Hit's assassination skill would be the kind that would allow him to be revived at all? What if Hit had a sort of skill which would crush or even destroy his heart? Think something like Beatrix's 5-point palm exploding heart technique from Kill Bill, which causes the target's heart to explode after the target takes 5 steps. Now, without a heart, there would obviously be no way for Goku to come back to life the way he did. But with that said, this was still a great episode and the fight made up for all these shortcomings. We can just conclude that Goku took a huge gamble in this fight, which is in character of him anyways. It was also really enjoyable despite putting an early end to the arc, and I can't wait to see more of Hit in the Multiverse Tournament like I said before. Seeing his rivalry with Goku develop, especially with this episode, makes me really excited to see what their next encounter will bring. On to episode 73, which I won't be spending as much time on, I promise. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much from this episode as it's a filler episode, or at least thought it would be a filler episode, but it turned out to be more entertaining than I expected. It's also very nice to see Dragon Ball Super start off 2017 with a Gohan-centric episode. However, we start off seeing Jaco taking a break at a space ramen stand, because apparently that's a thing, and he's telling the shop owner that he caught a diabolical criminal and sealed him away in a glass jar. Not sure how he was expecting that glass to keep him restrained for very long, but whatever. Of course, the criminal, which looks like this weird octopus thing with a feather tied to it, breaks free and flies off. So already we know that stuff will happen in this episode beyond the gag shenanigans we can typically expect out of Toriyama. The scene moves to Earth with Gohan writing some research paper. "When will you get your ass up and go train?" When Videl yelps in the other room. We see then that a commercial for the Great Saiyaman movie has just aired, with the star of the show being someone who looks a lot like General Blue. This star, named Barry Kahn, had personally asked Satan, yes, Satan, not Hercule, to act in a movie with him and chose Great Saiyaman as the subject of his film. That's a rather curious choice considering Barry himself said that Great Saiyaman was a vigilante that only made headlines for a brief period many years ago. This all but confirms what many people already suspected, that is, Gohan quit everything shortly after the Majin Buu saga, possibly after graduating from high school. So a brief note on Barry. I don't want to get too involved with looking into his character. He's that typical full of himself who thinks he can control everything type of character that generally appears in these sorts of filler episodes. Within the context of this brief arc specifically, I feel that he's really more of a plot device for Gohan, and a very minor one at that. When Gohan and Videl are invited to the studio where they're shooting the film, they eventually run into him. Barry tries to make advances on Videl, who promptly snubs him, later telling Gohan in private that he's way cooler, which frankly isn't a very hard thing to do, by the way. I also really like Pan's expression when Barry was hitting on her mom. This little baby's a lot smarter than her age would imply, on top of being the strongest newborn to ever exist. With regards to Barry, I feel that Gohan will eventually come to think that he doesn't want the Great Saiyaman to be portrayed by someone who thinks the universe revolves around him, because that's everything that he and indeed the Great Saiyaman is not. This may further serve to encourage him to take up the mantle again. His initial motivation to take part in the movie was, of course, in case Pan would eventually grow up to watch the film and like it. But there would be no better way to inspire his daughter than to act the hero in truth rather than through a movie. In addition to that, I feel that by hearing Videl say how much cooler Gohan is, as well as how she feels nostalgic at the times when they acted as Great Saiyaman and Great Saiyawoman, this might spur Gohan into stepping away from the office and back into doing what deep down he really enjoys. As I see it, the fact that Gohan naturally gets into character anytime he dons the costume, not to mention the lack of hesitation on his part when he witnessed the bank robbery, shows how much he values protecting people directly. This might be the push Gohan needs to start training again. I also felt for the longest time that if Gohan wants to do good in the world, he'd do much more as a fighter than as a scholar. The latter was also a career that Chi-Chi pushed onto him since he was a small child, and it's surprising that he hadn't come to the conclusion he'd do better as a fighter when it comes to protecting the world, considering all that's happening throughout Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Speaking of the robbery, Gohan runs into some old friends, the very same bank robbers he apprehended when he and Videl first met, not to mention Krillin's own count just increased. However, that little octopus creature came straight out of nowhere to possess the smaller dude, which eventually leads to a very brief fight, resulting in the creature escaping once more. The next day, everyone at the studio guessed that Gohan had to be the real Great Saiyaman since he had taken the costume home with him and later heard about the bank robbery, so it wasn't very hard for them to put two and two together. That is until Bulma came up with the excuse that she had made an extra suit at her lab which had been stolen and worn by someone else to act as the vigilante, thus saving Gohan's identity. However, Cocoa, the super cuteness of this episode, overheard the private conversation between them and later insisted that Gohan help her with her lines, though what she was really interested in may just be as simple as wanting to spend time with the true hero and have a personal flight tour of the city. I have to admit, this moment was kinda cute even if it wasn't between Gohan and Videl. However, this tour was cut short right when Jacob appears accusing Gohan of being possessed by the octopus alien, who we find out is named Watagash. The episode ends with a cliffhanger as Gohan is shot by a super cannon on Jaco's ship. Will Gohan survive the blast? Is he going to be able to protect Cocoa, or is Jaco right about Gohan's body being taken over by Watagash? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Super. Sorry guys, I just had to do that. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts on those two episodes in the comment section below. Like the video if you did, subscribe to my channel for more, and hopefully I will see you around.